She went down on the ground, manifested. She completely changed into the shape of a man, started screaming. But it wasn't that loud of a scream. It was probably not much louder than I'm talking now, but it reverberated throughout the whole church. Church. Even my sacristan went running out of the church because he thought we were having an earthquake or something. He went running out. Now it's my full-time job.
What has been your most harrowing experience with exorcism, and what impact did it have in your spiritual life?
Probably has to do with a particular case I've had. I've mentioned this actually in other public conferences. Just recently, there was a interview by Chris Stefanik, which I did, but I can kind of discuss it a little bit now because your viewers may not be familiar with that. But basically, what happened was I had this one case that had Beelzebub as a possessor, and he wouldn't obey me. He was just being obnoxious, and he wouldn't do anything. So I got annoyed, and I turned to God the Father, and I said, punish him in a way that he's never been punished before. And so he just went down on the ground. It was actually a woman who was possessed, but she went down on the ground, manifested. She completely changed into the shape of a man, started screaming. But it wasn't that loud of a scream. It was probably not much louder than I'm talking now, but it reverberated throughout the whole church. Even my sacristan went running out of the church because he thought we were having an earthquake or something. He went running out. And what the most harrowing part about it was actually the fact that when I was looking at the face of this woman, which it's now morphed into the face of what Beelzebub would actually look like, I could see that two things. One is how exacting God's justice is, but then also that's what hell looked like. And so it's the only time I've really been afraid. And it wasn't that I was afraid of the demon. It was just actually I was afraid of looking at that like, that is serious. So that's the most harrowing situation I've ever had. I mean, demons do all sorts of things like threatening to kill you and stuff like that, but it's usually idle threats. And we do a lot of praying in our community. As I mentioned, we pray 3 to 4 hours a day. So there's a series of prayers that we do to keep ourselves protected. And Our Lady's been very good in keeping us protected so that we don't have, those same kinds of close calls that you might see or hear about.
It was your baptism fire.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was a real turning point for my spiritual life because I realized the seriousness of what I'm doing as an exorcist. The second is the reality of God's justice. Also his mercy, because he was very merciful to that woman too. The woman, not Beelzebub. And so that's kind of set in motion a very long reflection over the course of years on how just God is, but also that how merciful he is. So both of those kind of how they interact and how they interplay. But it's like anything with an exorcist. Probably one of the best descriptions I ever heard of being an exorcist was from a Roman exorcist. He said, being an exorcist is like living the Christian life writ large. It means it's so impacting. The church's teachings become so real to you, like, for example, the reality of Christ's presence in the Eucharist, or the fact that, he shed his blood for us because the demons have this tremendous horror regarding the blood of Christ and things like that, or just even facets of Christ, various parts of Christ's suffering. Like one demon that I'm dealing with right now, one of the things that just completely crushes him is in having to reflect on how exhausted Christ was during the Passion, and yet he kept going and he kept doing what he needed to do. So it's things like that it gives you a real sense of how true the Catholic faith actually is.
And Father, can you discuss the significance of exorcism with the modern church right now and its confrontation with the reality of evil?
Yeah, I think there's two parts of it. I think there's a lot of people who are living sinful lives, acting like evil doesn't exist or that hell doesn't exist, because that's the one that you get when you're dealing with these things. They're in hell, right? And so you do get a sense of that. So I think that in our modern context, it brings back to the reality. I think the fact that exorcisms are increasing, and the number of exorcists, at least in the United States, and I think even worldwide to some degree, depending on where you're located. I know the Philippines has a number of them. So it's one of those things that the fact that there's kind of this increase is a recognition that God's letting the reality of evil and how the stuff is actually there, despite the fact that in the modern world, it's very easy to live your life as if evil doesn't exist, or that I have to worry about sin or things of that sort. when in point, in fact, we actually do have to worry about those things, and that we are, and that hell is real. So I think and so I think that helps quite a bit for us, especially in the modern world, especially in technology, which
Yeah.
is a good thing. It's not a bad thing, but it can sometimes cause us to think that, this stuff isn't real, etc. And this really helps to drive home that it actually is very real.
Speaking of the modern technology, Father, right now in social media, especially in our young generation, how can the devil use this modern technology to put curse or inflict someone?
There's quite a few different ways. Actually, that's a pretty, there's a lot of stuff. That's almost an interview on its own. But it's one of those things that I'll just talk about a few of them. So one of the
Sure.
first times I started coming across it was is that Satanists would actually curse texts that they would send to people. We also know as exorcists, we're seeing certain people come to us to be possessed because they're watching pornography online.
Mm.
Pornography is cursed. So the Satanists actually taught people
Wow.
who make pornography that if you curse the master copy of the pornography, when copies are made, when people watch, they can become, if there's open doors, etc.
Mm.
Usually just watch the pornography itself is an open door. They can become subject to the curse. And so we've actually seen men become possessed. And part of the reason they do that is because it boosts the addictiveness of the addictive
Mm.
dimension to the pornography. So then the guys become even more involved in the pornography, watching it, and things of that sort. We're also seeing it, just the amount of satanic rituals and witchcraft are now being posted online, to be talked about online. There's whole chat rooms, there's whole websites
Yeah.
for stuff now. So it's kind of proliferating on that line. There's sometimes I'll get asked the question, is AI demonic? And not in itself. Artificial intelligence is it's a form of programming. It's still within the set of limitations determined by the programming and also the character set or the code set that's in the machine itself, which can determine what it can and cannot do. So it ultimately boils down to how it's being programmed and also the data that's put into it. Because if you put certain kind of data in, you can get that kind of thing. Can be demonic stuff to that, but it has to be with whether the data input is demonic or if the people are programming it specifically for that purpose. But outside of that, which is not that common. So outside that context, we just haven't seen it in that. But it's so technology, unfortunately, is a good thing.
Mm.
It's a useful good. St. Thomas Aquinas calls it. It's just that it's like any other useful good. It can be used for evil.
Yes.
It's also one of those proofs of the principle that the more powerful a tool is, the more dangerous it can be, right? So it's one of those things that even though it does a tremendous amount of good, like this interview right here, people can use it for also very nefarious or very
Yeah.
bad purposes.
Gusto mo bang magkaroon ng early access? Kumbaga, ikaw yung unang makakapanood ng mga na-interview ko mga guests dito sa ating programa na Istoryang Katoliko. Magagawa mo yan mga ka-faith by joining my Patreon group. Kasi sa ginagawa ko na pag-i-interview ng mga different guests dito sa Pilipinas at sa ibang bansa, actually hindi ko pa talaga siya na-edit at na-upload agad. Marami pa akong backlog kasi nga I'm a one-man team dito sa ginagawa ko. So most of the time, ako talaga nag-e-edit. Actually, ako talaga nag-e-edit ng lahat ng mga interviews at mga vlogs dito sa channel na to. As much as I want, na after ko sila ma-interview, ay ma-upload ko na. Hindi ko po yung magawa kasi kailangan natin i-edit at pagandahin pa yung interview sa paglalagay ng mga slide and information na very relevant at mas makakatulong pa sa inyo. Pwede nyo siyang ma-access by joining my Patreon group. Once na natapos ko na yung interview, i-upload ko kagad dyan sa ating Patreon group ang mga pre-recorded interview. At alam nyo mga ka-faith, sa pag-join nyo din dyan sa ating Patreon group, ay matutulungan nyo ko dito sa ating ginagawang online evangelization. Alam nyo naman na itong ginagawa natin ay hindi libre. May mga cost tayong ginagastos, mga ginagamit natin, yung pamasahe, pagpupuntahan natin yung mga ini-interview ko na face-to-face, and etc. In due time, I'm planning to build a studio, a home studio. Malaki talaga ang cost at gagastusin dito. Kaya mga ka-faith, by joining my Patreon group, mas matutulungan nyo ko na mapa-improve at mas mapaganda pa at mapagpatuloy pa itong ginagawa natin na online evangelization. Di lang kayo magkakaroon ng early access, kundi matutulungan nyo din ako dito sa ating online evangelization. Kumbaga, you will be my partner in doing this. Kung wala kang gifts na ginagawa ko, magsalita, mag-interview, pero may capacity ka to help me in this mission, ay magiging mag-partner tayo. Ako gagawa ng pag-i-invite, pag-i-interview, but at the same time, alam ni Lord na you help me and you've been partnering me with this mission. Kaya mga ka-faith, para maka-join ka dito sa ating Patreon group, ilalagay ko yung link kung saan mo pwedeng ma-access itong Patreon group na to. May cost siya, may konting babayaran ka lang, pero yung magiging benefit naman yan sa'yo spiritually ay sobrang overload. Thank you so much and God bless.